Welcome to today's webinar, Alternative Fuel Vehicles, Are They the Chicken or the Egg? Brought to you by NCSL. At this time, all lines have been placed on a listen-only mode to provide favorable sound quality during today's presentation. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Melanie Condon. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Condon. I staff the National Conference of State Legislatures Environment Committee and also the Energy, Transportation, and Agriculture Committee. So I'd like to welcome everyone today to our webinar on alternative fuel vehicles. Today's webinar is co-hosted by the NCSL Environment Committee and the Energy, Transportation, and Agriculture Committee. So as a reminder, today's webinar is the second in a six-part series of e-learning webinars that the ETA Committee, Environment Committee, Communications, Interstate Commerce, and Financial Services Committee, Human Services and Welfare Committee, and the Hunger Partnership are all co-sponsoring. A recording of our first webinar, which was held last week on the 2013 Farm Bills, can be found on our website at www.ncsl.org. And then coming up next week, the third webinar in the series will be on Thursday, June 27th at 4 p.m. Eastern, and it'll focus on Gulf Coast cleanup following the BP oil spill. But back to the task at hand, today's webinar will feature two presenters who will be providing a look at alternative fuel vehicles and the infrastructure developments needed to support these technologies. So I'll go ahead and introduce the speakers who will give their presentations, and then following the presentations, we'll open the line for a question and answer period. As a reminder, you can type questions into the Q&A chat box, which is in the left-hand side of your screen at any time during the webinar. So our first speaker, Alex Schroeder, is the manager of the Transportation Technology Department at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, known as NREL. At NREL, Alex oversees all program coordination, quality assurance, and development in the transportation deployment activities. Prior to joining NREL, Alex was the senior manager for transportation fuels at the Colorado Governor's Energy Office, where Alex worked to promote and develop the use of AFVs for the state and was also co-chair of the Colorado Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. So with that, the floor is yours, Alex.
Great, thanks, Melanie, and I'm really honored to be here today. My professional background, at least for the last 10 years, has been working with states on energy policy, and so it's great just being a couple months into the lab to get to work with an organization like NCSL and get to talk about something I'm very passionate about, alternative fuel vehicles, and what states can really be doing to take the lead. So I was asked to provide an overview of really what's going on in the market. What are market trends, and then how does that correlate to what's going on in the states and other policy trends, and then maybe ending with a couple market barriers that are really make or break factors in the development of the alternative fuel deployment. So a bit about the National Renewable Energy Lab. We're based in Golden, Colorado. We are the only national laboratory that's dedicated solely to energy efficiency and renewable energy. I will say transportation is the one area where we do get outside that scope a little bit. We follow the federal definition for alternative fuels, and so we do work on natural gas and other non-renewable transportation fuels. But again, trying to tie it back to our core mission of energy efficiency, renewables, sustainable energy. We've been a leading clean energy innovation research and development facility for about the past 35 years. We have 1,700 employees here. And last time I checked, our campus was the greenest campus in the world, so we really try to practice what we preach here. So just a quick overview, and I touched on this a bit already, but to talk about the current market for not only alternative fuels, but transportation fuels generally, some interesting trends that we're seeing that are kind of changing the discussion, and then to get into specific market barriers and state policies and things that states are looking to do to promote this market. Just some key points that I'm trying to make throughout are that, there really is a driving impetus towards the increase of use of alternative fuels, and it's both market-driven and policy-driven, and I think it's a really exciting space to be in right now. Something that you hear a lot of time is that there's no silver bullet, and I truly think that's the case for alternative fuels, where we really have to look at a portfolio of options and really pursue that all-of-the-above energy policy. And I think finally, and something that certainly resonates with me and likely those on the call, is that states play a huge role in developing this market, and they're actually taking the lead in many cases. So this is something that I think is a bit contradictory in itself, but a trend that I think has a lot of implications, and that's effectively that people are driving less than ever before. Ever since World War II, we have seen the average vehicle miles traveled per capita go up consistently until about 2006, where we saw it peak, and it's been decreasing every year. Part of that certainly has to do with the recession, but there's some underlying demographics in that with vehicle ownership, the fact that younger generations aren't placing a priority on buying vehicles. It's really changing the ways that automakers and a lot of folks view the future of mobility. And I think, the contradiction comes in when you pair that with the graph on the right, that people are spending more and more every year per capita on their energy expenditures for the transportation sector. And I like to compare this to what people see with their electric rates, because I think people can relate very personally to what they get every month on their electric and gas bill and then what they pay at the pump. And you can really see that the increase in the transportation market, over the last couple periods of 5 years has increased pretty dramatically. So another thing that a lot of people are talking about is our newfound supply of domestic oil, and it definitely is changing the conversation, but not in the way that one might think. So we do have more domestic resources, but the fact of the matter is that global markets are really driving the price of oil. And so this is just, I think, a great graph that the New York Times put together last year that really shows our domestic production juxtaposed against our overall consumption, and then really where the demand's going to come from going out for the next 10, 15 years. And there's a lot of embedded factors in this, global refining capacity. But I think the fact of the matter is this is a boon for the United States, but it's not necessarily going to help when we go to fill up our gas, our vehicle with gas every couple of weeks. I think this is another compelling slide that really shows the state of the transportation market versus what we have for the electric power sector. A lot has been done by the states in particular to really diversify the electricity mix that the utilities have. And you can see there are a lot of wedges in the pie. You go down to the transportation sector, 93%, at least as of 2011, is petroleum-based fuels. And that does account for the ethanol blend that's in every gallon of gasoline. But when you really look at these two main energy markets and compare those two pie charts, it's staggering. Just the general lack of diversity and I think risk as a nation that we put ourselves at. So to put it in perspective, we use about 5 billion barrels of oil annually. 60% of that, a little over 60% of that, goes to the light-duty vehicles that most of us drive for personal use. And about 20% of that is consumed by the heavy-duty market. UPS, who's going to be talking as well, it would fit in that category. The remainder is primarily marine and aviation. So where do alternative fuels and alternative fuel vehicles fit into this? This is a chart that really shows what is the consumption of alternative fuels annually, and then what's the number of alternative fuel vehicles on the street. Again, another interesting slide that kind of has some contradictory results. The majority of the alternative fuel vehicles that are on the road are flex fuel E85 vehicles, yet they are a minority and only 20% of the consumers of alternative fuels. And so it's again just another way to look at this, and it almost stresses that just because you build it doesn't mean it will come. You have to have a market, and with flex fuel vehicles, there's a challenge of just letting folks know that their vehicle can run on both E85 and gasoline. So again, this is one of those slides that really you can draw a lot of conclusions from. Next slide, just to give you an idea of the different types of vehicles on the road and what that means in terms of fuel consumption. Your Class 8 semi-truck uses about 25 times as much fuel as a light-duty vehicle in any given year. And I think this also reinforces that there's no silver bullet for fuel. Some of these different vehicle markets are going to be more aligned with certain vehicle and fuel characteristics. So moving into what we're seeing in the market in terms of infrastructure, which I was asked to focus on, with the exception of electric vehicles, it's been relatively stagnant over the last 20 years. You are seeing some growth, And it is increasing over the last couple of years, so that's encouraging. But even if you look at the 2011 baseline that we have compared to gasoline stations, we had 10,000 alternative fuel stations or infrastructure points in the United States versus 157,000 gasoline stations. So when you talk about range anxiety and really the seamless integration, there's still a long way to go in establishing the infrastructure to put it on a comparable level with gasoline. Now, I don't want to make the implication that that is your measure of success, because as any market develops, it's not going to come in and compete with the incumbent technology, and there's certainly a smart way to do it, but it does just put in perspective with how well embedded that gasoline and diesel convenience factor is. So now I want to focus a bit and just talk about some of the policies that are shaping the market, both at the national and state level. I think the two biggest policies at the national level, and this is certainly subject to debate, are the CAFE standards that were just passed, I want to say about 6 months ago for years 2017, 2025, and about 2 years ago to take us up to 2017. You can see by the chart on the left, we were relatively stagnant with CAFE standards for a period of about 15 years, and then it just takes off. And so you're seeing a lot of work by the automakers to really figure out how they're going to get to an average of 54.5 miles per gallon. And it really is driving a broad discussion about vehicle electrification, about lightweighting vehicles, about all kinds of technologies that are going to be needed. And again, it's kind of that portfolio approach to meet the CAFE standard. So on the fuel side, you also have the Renewable Fuel Standard 2, which was passed in the 2007 energy bill that requires an increasing amount of ethanol in our fuel mix between now and 2022. This is certainly something that's in the news now, and I think folks are really trying to figure out where are we at relative to these targets, what's the path going forward. But again, this is a major driver of what refiners and fuel providers are looking at least under the current understanding that they have to meet regulatory compliance going forward. I think the other thing that's a little harder to show in a graph is the Clean Air Act, which is manifesting itself in a number of ways. EPA just released a draft rulemaking on Tier 3 emission standards for gasoline, which is really looking at the future of gasoline and what that mix looks like. So there are a number of policies and regulations in play at the federal level that, again, are having a strong impact on what the future is going to look like in transportation fuels. So now maybe bringing it a little closer to home to talk about what the states are doing, and this is actually something that I was involved in with the state of Colorado, is this multi-state MOU for natural gas vehicles. And essentially the idea is that states can do a lot more by working together, and that one of the main barriers for natural gas vehicles is not necessarily a technology hurdle, but really just developing the market. And so it started with 2 states, Colorado, Oklahoma, actually I should say 4, Colorado, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, banding together to commit their fleet purchases to natural gas vehicles to really reassure to the automakers that we're with you as you develop this market, we'll support it, we understand we've got to practice what we preach, and so we will set aside some of our annual fleet purchases to help you develop a market for natural gas vehicles. Truly was a partnership. This is something that was talked about with the automakers throughout. And I think, you know, the second idea here was to really get back at the core of this webinar is the whole chicken and the egg thing. And whether the state with its fleet purchases were the chicken or the egg, at least in Colorado, we were certainly looking towards how our investments could help leverage the infrastructure build out across the state of Colorado. A lot of other states seem to be on that same path. So this was something that was signed in 2011. They went through a joint multi-state procurement last year. The results were released in October, and I think they're kind of going through that process, and you're starting to see some major announcements out of the states. I know Oklahoma has purchased about 300 vehicles for their state fleet. Colorado just announced the purchase of over 100, and so the states really are, this MOU is really starting to bear fruit in the states. The next one I'll mention also focuses on the vehicle sides, and this has to do with the zero-emission vehicle mandates that California has in place. And California has the unique authority to set their own emission standards so long as they're more stringent than federal standards. And other states have the choice, if they would like, with following California's rules. 10 states in Washington, D.C. have done that, and the effect is to really create a very large market for what's being called zero-emission vehicles. And in a lot of cases, this is going to be plug-in electric and hydrogen vehicles, effectively vehicles without tailpipe emissions. The target is that by 2025, about 15.5% of vehicles that are sold into the markets in those states must meet that zero emissions target. And again, California being a big market driver, and certainly with 10 other states on board, this represents about a third of all annual auto purchases. This is something the automakers are really paying attention for and is driving a lot of the research in both the electrification and in the fuel cell space. So maybe moving a little bit closer to NCSL and the state legislatures is just to give a quick overview of what's going on in the states policy-wise. And I'll point you towards the Department of Energy's Alternative Fuel Data Center. There's a web address later on in the presentation. This is really designed to be a one-stop shop for information on alternative fuels, be it station locations or policies. And so what I did was really go back to the 2012 legislative sessions and pull out some trends with who was doing what and what exactly they were doing to give you all an idea of what issues states are increasingly confronted with. And this is just a chart showing that by state, the states that did adopt an alternative fuels policy, you know, who did what. And you'll see a number of these just had one policy. Florida was very aggressive. They had 9 policies that they moved forward in 2012. So again, it's just a relative way of looking at which states took up this issue in 2012. Moving to the next slide, I realize this is a bit of an eye chart and maybe something that's better off looking at afterwards, but I can kind of tick through it. But we broke down those policies into what did they cover? What was really the driver there? And so there's 4 categories here: incentives, and incentive by type, whether it was a rebate or grant. A majority of the policies passed in 2012 did provide some type of rebate where there was an incentive. You look at the targeted market. Are we addressing vehicle owners? Are we addressing fuel providers, utilities? Primarily, the policies that were adopted in 2012 were looking at fleet managers and fleet purchases. And a lot of those, I can say, are in the states, and it looked at state vehicle acquisitions. You go down to the bottom left on regulatory topics, what were the main drivers? That's a bit of a hodgepodge. Registration and licensing, fuel use and acquisition, again by states, were major topics, and then overarching climate change and energy initiatives were a big driver as well. Going down to the bottom right, this is the breakout of those policies by fuel and technology, and you can see that natural gas and electric vehicles were the primary focus by a lot of these legislative actions. Certainly, right close behind that were hybrid and plug-in electric vehicles as well as propane vehicles. So I wanted to dig in and just provide a couple specific examples on infrastructure and then put those in the context of barriers. You know, these are 3 states that in 2012 did look at different legislative actions that would help get infrastructure in the ground. You look at the state of Arizona, they're offering $75,000 to install biofuel storage and dispensing equipment. The state of Colorado is providing grants to local governments and multifamily dwellings for electric vehicle charging. And I think a big one that just came out of Wyoming last year is they're providing low-interest loans of up to $750,000 for the installation of natural gas infrastructure. The interesting thing about that is there are no principal or interest payments required in the first 2 years. And so, again, these are primarily targeted financing, but that is a major obstacle for alternative fuels infrastructure. As this market is developing, it truly is, in a lot of cases, a partnership between private industry and government to help almost work through some of the growing pains and just some of the capital constraints that these companies have as they are putting stations into the market. I think the last thing I'll mention, just because it is a federal source of funding that is primarily administered by states, is CMAQ money. And this has become a big topic. I've been on countless webinars this year where states are really interested in looking at funding provided by the U.S. Department of Transportation to put in alternative fuel infrastructure. This money is part of the Clean Air Act, and it's provided to the states by DOT to, as it says in its name, mitigate air quality impacts and traffic congestion. And I think the idea is that alternative fuel vehicles, certainly on the air quality piece, can play a large role. And so it's a fair chunk of money. It's about a $2.2 billion program nationally, and it's a formula-funded program that goes to the states and in a lot of cases goes from the state down to the local level. I think this is a big one here, and really figuring out specifically in the electric and natural gas vehicle market what the role of the utility is absolutely critical to the future of both of these technologies. In many cases, the electric and gas utilities are going to be a conduit in every single transaction that's made with these vehicles. They're also regulated utilities, and so they can't just do things willy-nilly, and in most cases, things have to be deemed in the interest of the ratepayer. But really figuring out what is their role in developing this market. Is it promotional? Are they facilitating it more passively? That's going to differ state to state. But on the flip side, this really is a growth opportunity for utilities. They're seeing electric demand relatively flat, in many cases negative, and you just look at where they can have an impact and increase their revenues. Transportation provides a really bright but still very uncertain opportunity. Another point I like to make is that folks tend to get in the natural gas camp, the electric camp, the biofuels camp, whatever. Specifically with natural gas and electric vehicles, I think it's not often stated that these are intimately related. Every natural gas vehicle is an electric vehicle and vice versa. About $1 of every gallon of CNG and your typical market comes from the cost of electricity, and in most states, in an increasing way, natural gas is a part of the electricity mix. And so these two are inherently tied. Certainly the vehicle piece is different, but there are, particularly in the case of the utilities, ways for these two markets to be mutually reinforcing. So before I move on, I just want to cover three key utility considerations that have come up, at least in Colorado and elsewhere, really trying to figure out what is the role for third-party sales. Right now, utilities have, in a lot of cases, regulated monopolies. And so when you're reselling a regulated product, states need to be thinking about whether or not that's an allowable activity, and that really can be an enabler of private sector investment in alternative fuel infrastructure. I think another thing that's important is looking at demand charges, and a lot of utilities have a billing setup where they have a certain threshold, and if you use a lot more electricity than that in a given month, you're now paying a higher electricity rate. For something like a natural gas or an electric vehicle charging station, it's pretty easy to get to those demand charges, and the ripple effect is not necessarily for an individual transaction. It's like you're on your entire month's bill. So it really can, especially for a business that's just putting fueling infrastructure in, be crippling. And I think the last thing I'll point out is just the cost of connecting to the grid and really figuring out what's the role of the utility versus the infrastructure provider in building out the grid, getting access to gas pipelines, et cetera. I think this is my last topic, and this is not necessarily infrastructure or vehicle related, but it's certainly, I should say it is infrastructure related in a much different way, and that's looking at the discussion around alternative fuels and excise taxes. And I threw this in because I knew, at least in 2013, this was a hot topic in a number of states, and I think it really is trying to figure out, in the face of declining fuel tax revenues, either through increased efficiency, alternative fuels, or people just driving less, what is the role of alternative fuels, and how do you balance parity and promotion? And there are a number of ways states approach this. Several have decals that are designed to provide an incentive for alternative fuel vehicles. A number of states are revisiting these decals because they realize that they're actually creating unintended barriers. But I think a big takeaway that I want to point out, really from the technical side, is that not every gallon is created equal. And this chart on the right shows your energy density per gallon of a number of different alternative fuels. And most states have their gas tax pegged to a volumetric measure, and that's typically the gallon. And so, again, a number of states are looking at this. You can see ethanol, propane, and liquefied natural gas all really pay a gas tax penalty because they don't get the same bang for the buck out of that gallon that you get with a gallon of gasoline or diesel. So again, this doesn't necessarily fit in the whole chicken and egg piece, but it definitely is a key question. And that, that 150% penalty for an LNG user is actually a pretty big deal, and I'm guessing UPS can attest to this. They drive the big trucks. When you're using 13,000 gallons of fuel a year, every penny adds up. And so I just wanted to kind of put this out there again as another enabling or potentially disabling policy that states are looking at in the alternative fuel vehicle space. So I think that's it for my presentation. I realized after I got through it I had a whole lot more content than I thought. I'm not sure, Melanie, how you want to do questions. Certainly happy to take them now or wait till the end, whatever makes sense on your end.
I think we'll wait till the end to do questions. But thank you very much. It was very helpful. So we'll switch over now to our second speaker, who is Jim Bruce, the Vice President of UPS Corporate Public Affairs. Jim served UPS in Washington, D.C. for 4 years as Special Counsel and now Vice President, working on issues related to energy policy, alternative fuel vehicles, and sustainability. Jim is on the UPS Working Committee on Sustainability, and he was also the Senior Counsel to the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. So as a reminder, following Jim's presentations, we'll do the live question and answer session. And if you guys joining us from the web can use the chat box in the lower right part of your screen to submit questions, and we'll also have the operator do live questions on the phone as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor for me as well to participate in this NCSL webinar. I want to begin by giving a little snapshot about UPS. We are truly seeking to move our trucks to the bridging fuel of the future and off oil. Now, there are actually other fuels as well, but when we say bridging fuel, we're talking liquid natural gas. We have roughly 100,000 trucks worldwide, 17,000 heavy trucks in the United States. These are the long-haul tractor trailers. We're also the 9th largest airline in the world. A big problem for us is not just the cost of petroleum, but the volatility of that price. And as Alex mentioned, even if we were to become sufficient in oil, self-sufficient, and a lot of people believe that we'll become the world's largest oil producer in the next several years, our prices will still be set by an international cartel in a world market. So, therefore, we'd like to move off of oil where we can gradually over time. And as virtually everything moves by truck, ultimately, if we can find cleaner, cheaper alternatives to oil, that should benefit the consumer as well. We now believe that partial decoupling from oil is thinkable. We have, I guess the latest estimates are 150 years of natural gas reserves. The price appears relatively stable and well below petroleum. The next slide talks about UPS's past experience with alternative fuel vehicles. I want to talk about what's our past experience, where we are now, and where we're headed. We had a fleet of plug-in electric vehicles in New York City running on lead-acid batteries in the 1930s. We began testing compressed natural gas package cars. That's the little brown trucks you see ubiquitously. We started those tests in 1989, and we had 1,000 in service by 2001. So we've had extensive experience with CNG vehicles. And I think a key point to make here is that achieving an acceptable return on investment on alternative fuel vehicles quickly drives you to focus on the fuel-intensive trucks. Alex made reference to that, and that for us is the long-haul heavy Class 8 truck. And the reason for that is the name of the game in all of these alternative fuel vehicles is to save enough on petroleum to pay for the extra costs of the alternative fuel vehicle itself. And if we have a choice of, say, finding an alternative for our little brown trucks that might use 8 to 10 gallons a day versus our long-haul truck that will use 100 to 170 gallons of diesel, clearly we're driven toward the long-haul truck. And frankly, at the moment, for that long-haul diesel truck, the only viable current option for us is liquid natural gas. Compressed natural gas, we just can't stack enough cylinders to get the range requirements. We began actually in 2001 with 11 LNG heavy tractor trailers and been running them ever since in service. And I should note that in all of our alternative fuel vehicles, we have needed governmental financial incentives to make this program work for us. The next slide raises this issue of hub and spoke central fueling, and it goes to the heart of the chicken and egg fueling infrastructure problem. Alex talked about range anxiety. If we are a hub and spoke facility where all of our trucks return to the same place, the same fueling station every night, we don't have range anxiety. So if you look at our system, we have hubs where all our trucks radiate out from and return at night. And we have the spokes, if you will, are the rates that package cars are the paths that the package cars take in leaving a hub and then coming back. They're delivering packages and picking them up. So our LNG tractor trailers have a range of 5 miles or so. So they'll go from one hub with a trailer filled with packages to the next hub, drop the trailer off, come back with another trailer to the place where they started. So our drivers get to sleep at home at night. Now, fueling infrastructure, as many have indicated, is expensive at hubs. And so we have sought government assistance. And in fact, where we get government assistance, we will have what we call through-the-fence access to the public. So, if someone wants to buy fuel from us, say natural gas, they can do it. So I should also, a major point I want to make is that UPS is fuel neutral. I agree with Alex. There's simply no silver bullet, and you'll see in a moment why that's true. We are beginning to see hubs, certain areas that pencil in where we think we can do liquid natural gas and not need federal incentives, but that's not true at all our hubs, and it's certainly not true for the rest of our alternative fuel vehicles. The next slide shows a map of the United States with the heavy truck corridors. And to the right on that slide is the pathways of natural gas pipelines, and the width shows the volume of the natural gas pipelines. What's interesting is that the pathways tend to line up. There seems to be natural gas along virtually all of these heavy truck corridors. The next slide shows UPS's major hubs. So you can visualize each little H as a hub where the trucks return at night, the heavy trucks are there, and the little package cars radiate outwards on the spokes and come back at night. The next slide shows a map of what we call the Energy Security Corridor. And this started in 2001. We had heavy trucks running from Los Angeles, actually Ontario, California, up to Las Vegas, and now they run all the way to Salt Lake City. These are LNG tractors. So that's why we call it the Energy Security Corridor. We're able to get rid of using about 95% of the oil those trucks would otherwise use. Next slide talks about the all-of-the-above strategy. There's President Obama at our facility in Las Vegas, Nevada, and next to him is that large tractor trailer on his left, as you look at him, is an LNG tractor. And we were very pleased that the president started talking about the need for an all-out, all-in, all-the-above strategy. He had been at a facility of ours at Landover, Maryland the year before, and he began talking about natural gas for trucks. Earlier than that, his focus seems to be electric technology, electric vehicles. And the problem that we tried to explain is we can't do heavy over-the-road tractor trailers with just simply batteries. The range isn't there. So anyway, there's been a progression in the president's view, and we're very pleased with that. Now, the next slide talks about the current UPS situation. We have what we call a rolling laboratory. That is, these are trucks in service, delivering, picking up packages, but we're also testing them at the same time. And as of, I believe it was January 11th of this year, we had 2,538 alternative fuel vehicles. That's closer to 3,000 now. Over 1,000 compressed natural gas package cars are there. 112 heavy LNG trailers, and you can see the fueling stations there that we've got. Again, we still need financial incentives. We'd like to get away from financial incentives from government. And so we are systematically searching hub by hub for cheap LNG. And we're also seeking federal and state financial assistance, particularly in the states, and removal of the federal disincentives. I mean, we get some assistance at the federal level, but probably the most, in terms of new incentives we're asking for, it's to get rid of the disincentives, and I'll explain that in a minute. So we have close to acceptable economics in isolated instances with LNG, but not with other fuels elsewhere. This next slide shows a snapshot of our fleet as of January 11, 2013. You can see we have, to pick some numbers here, again, about 1,000 compressed natural gas vehicles. This is broken up into our domestic fleet and our international fleet. You will see that, for example, we have internationally 46 ethanol vehicles. They are all in Brazil, and they run on ethanol made from sugarcane. We have about 900 propane vehicles in Canada. And so that's a snapshot. And particularly I should mention, in the UK, we have 10 tractor trailers that run on not just natural gas, it's methane made from biogas. And the reason we did that was that we were logistics provider for the Olympics, and we did our whole logistics carbon neutral, and so that significantly reduced our carbon footprint. Next slide talks about the advantages of an LNG heavy truck. This is no spark plugs. It's compression ignition for you motorhead there. We only need 5% diesel in the fuel, and 95% of it is the LNG. We get a 26% reduction, tailpipe to wheel reduction in carbon. We have much reduced operating costs because natural gas is so much cheaper than oil. But the key thing to take away from this is on that heavy LNG truck, we're paying a premium of about 100%. We're paying on the order of $100,000 extra for the liquid natural gas heavy truck. Fueling stations are also expensive, but it's particularly the truck itself that's a problem for us. We've got a lot of experience, a decade of experience, so even though we have these difficulties with cost, we're very much committed to using LNG tractors. The next slide shows you a picture of this is a Kenworth heavy LNG tractor. You can see the cryogenic, and I believe that's the diesel small tank there as well. It's a great vehicle, and we're buying a lot of them, but they cost a premium of about $100,000. The next slide is trying to make the point. I won't get into the detail of it all. There are efforts now to find ways to fuel heavy trucks with natural gas using spark plugs, and it's not a diesel cycle. And we're interested in that, but if you want the full efficiency and long range and pulling power that we've had with diesel trucks, then you need the diesel cycle. You need really the kind of LNG we're buying now. Now, if you have any oil involvement, any diesel fuel, like in our LNG trucks, they have after treatment of the emissions. And this is a substantial cost to us and a high cost of maintenance. So we're constantly looking for ways. Are there alternatives where instead of cleaning up the emissions outside the truck after it's emitted from the engine, that we can have the combustion itself clean that up? And I won't get into the details, but to a greater extent than people realize, the emissions requirements on trucks, heavy trucks, drive the economics of the fleet. Now let me talk a little bit about the future for UPS. We plan to expand to 800 heavy LNG trucks by the end of 2014 in 10 states, and you can see the new fueling stations there. Our Chief Sustainability Officer made the comment that moving into LNG is a means to get us onto what we see as the bridging fuel of the future and off of oil. So we're very serious about this. And again, I mentioned that, we were already thinking about the issues of carbon regulation or carbon pricing, and today we're using natural gas made from biomethane, from landfills. So, as we look out at the future, our conclusion is that given the vast natural gas resources in the United States, are there other opportunities for future truck fuels made from natural gas or natural gas derivative? And that would include methanol, which is wood alcohol, or dimethyl ether. Volvo just announced that they're going to produce trucks that will run on dimethyl ether which is a liquid that's very similar to diesel fuel, that they will make available. The next slide, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but we've done tests with EPA where we are injecting methanol into a diesel engine, and we did this on the medium trucks and found that it dramatically reduced the emissions that we're trying to clean up with catalytic reduction or particulate traps, to the point where you don't need the catalyst, and you may not need the particulate trap at all. So we're constantly looking for new technologies in trucks, and I agree with Alex that this is a very exciting time. Frankly, I've spent my entire career in energy policy. I've never seen a more exciting time than I see now. And I would mention that we're also looking at methanol not just as a potential fuel to displace diesel fuel in current engines. Methanol can also be used in fuel cells as well as hydrogen, and UPS is very interested in testing fuel cells at first in medium-sized trucks like our delivery vans. I think the key point here is there's a diversity of heavy truck alternatives with various fuel options, and if you create this diversity, it is likely to, we believe, drive down the cost of the current heavy trucks that really only rely on LNG. Now, the next slide talks about transition fuels. What are the transition fuels that can carry us into a carbon-conscious world? I mentioned in the UK, it's an LNG tractor, but that methane is coming from landfills, and it can come from biomethane of any sort, actually. We're looking beyond LNG to, as I said before, the ethanol injection and hydrogen as well. I don't want anyone to think that we don't believe that electric traction is important. We believe it's very important. We believe many trucks will be running on electric traction, whether they're using just plug-in or not. They may be fuel cells, but we see that as the future. So the next slide talks about the UPS game plan. We are systematically looking for pockets of cheap liquid natural gas. We are systematically state financial incentives. We have our regional public affairs representatives going out in all of the states. Florida just signed a bill that provided significant incentives, and you can see the details there. So this is very important to us because we see less in the way of financial incentives from the federal government. So we're looking more and more to the states to pick up the slack. If we get liquid natural gas at our hubs, then that gives us methane. We can use that methane for our package cars as CNG. So all of this is also part of looking for cheaper alternatives to the liquid natural gas trucks, either by other manufacturers or other means. And as I pointed out, we're concerned about what we're likely to get from the federal government. I mean, CMAQ is very important. Clean Cities is important. We certainly care a lot about Department of Energy R&D, but we're frankly looking to get rid of the disincentives. And I think Alex mentioned disincentives at the state level. We're seeking that as well. I mean, for example, if you have a federal excise tax or a state excise tax of 12% on a truck and you're paying twice as much for it, that means we're paying a lot of money in taxes for trying to do the right thing. And you've got this other problem of liquid natural gas being taxed volumetrically as opposed to what its energy content is relative to a gallon of diesel fuel. Anyway, there are a variety of disincentives we're trying to get removed. And finally, I would just mention state green procurement laws. UPS believes it has a competitive advantage in sustainability. And we would love to see at the federal level and at the state level government procurement that looks at the sustainability of the vendors to government. So at the same time we're looking for incentives for alternative fuel vehicles, we're also pushing green procurement laws, both particularly at the state level. So as an overview, the United States has got the domestic energy resources to get UPS trucks off of oil gradually. We're fuel neutral. We really don't care if we have a hub that has bug juice and it's cheaper and cleaner than petroleum, and we can find a truck manufacturer that will produce an engine that runs on bug juice, we're interested. And as for the chicken and egg problem, central fueling by fleets is, I think, a way to avoid that chicken and egg problem. So I think the smart thing to do is to focus on fleets at first and then let the non-fleet piggyback onto the infrastructure that will come about from the fleets. Again, we're trying to eliminate federal disincentives, state disincentives, and when we try to decide where we're going to deploy our trucks, we look at each hub by itself. We look at the full range of what is the opportunity here, including what has the state done in the way of incentives. I mean, that's where we deploy, is where the penciling works out the best for us. So that's it. Thank you again for letting me participate, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Jim. That was great. So now I'll open things up to the audience if anyone has any questions for our presenters. Any questions submitted via the Q&A chat box, I can read out loud for you, or you can say them over the phone to the operator. So, operator, if you could please begin the Q&A now.
Certainly, and ladies and gentlemen, if you do have a phone question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad at this time. Once again, if you do have a phone question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad at this time.
Well, I'll get things rolling, take the liberty as the moderator to ask a question. So, Jim, obviously UPS sort of has their hand in every kind of alternative fuel vehicle, it seems, but you talked a lot about how most of the fleet is natural gas fueled. So, what do you think some advantages and disadvantages are to natural gas fuel versus the other alternative fuel vehicles? And Alex, I'll ask your opinion as well.
Well, the advantages of natural gas are that we got lots of it, it's cheap, and it works well in engines. It doesn't require rocket science to create trucks that will run on it. The emissions problem is the most sophisticated part of the technological difficulty. But, if you got a fuel that inherently burns cleaner, and it does, than petroleum, and it's much cheaper, that's just a natural place to go. And the infrastructure, again, if we can put it at our hubs, we can lick that. We're using. I mean, there's a vast array of stations being put on heavy truck corridors by Clean Energy, I think Shell, several others as well, and we are using them in certain places. I mean, we have to make a decision on a case-by-case basis. Do we want to own the station, or will we use somebody else's station close by one of our hubs? So all in all, and in the case of the heavy trucks, it's the only option that we see at the moment as an alternative to diesel.
Great, thanks. Alex, do you have something to add?
No, I think Jim hit it on the head. I mean, really, the big driver right now is price. If you can go to someone and say, we can get you off of oil and you can save money and you'll lower your tailpipe emissions, I mean, there's a very, very compelling case to be made. And I think the other compelling thing with natural gas is that there was a big push in the 90s by the utilities to look at natural gas, and natural gas prices, really scared off a lot of that investment. I think with some of the new technologies we have on the production side, there's a lot more certainty, and so volatility. There's a great chart of alternative fuel prices over the last 10 years. I mean, CNG is almost flat compared to gasoline, diesel, and from a fleet perspective, there's nothing that can blow your budget out of the water quicker than rising gasoline or diesel prices. So, I think Jim made some great points too about fleets really being the driver. I think consumers make vehicle purchasing decisions for a lot of different reasons. Economics maybe not always the top one, whereas fleets really can take the lead. They've got the economies of scale to build the infrastructure, and you kind of work from that. So, really, I think I maybe just agree with Jim.
Great. Operator, do we have any questions on the line?
Currently, we have no phone questions.
All right. I'll just launch into another one. Alex, I'm curious, that slide you had with the states and their policies in 2012, and Florida was, far and above the other states, and I'm curious if, what your thoughts are on why, if it was a citizen demand industry in Florida, if it was, politicians, what was the impetus for them being so far above the other states?
That's actually a really good question. You might check with someone in Florida. It's always hard to say what the hot button issues are for any given session, any given time of year. I know Colorado, there were a number of bills passed this year, but I couldn't tell you specifically what was driving it in Florida, except for just this general sea change that you're seeing, that alternative fuels are becoming more mainstream. And so as that happens, you just see the need in states to update regulations and legislation to reflect that. And it goes back to as basic as, making sure that your fuel tax is consistent to, looking more on the incentive piece. So it's hard to pinpoint exactly what ignited the fire in Florida.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Well, are there any questions, operator?
No questions at this time.
All right. Well, hearing no more questions, I'll go ahead and conclude today. I want to thank, obviously, Alex and Jim for your great presentations. I think they were really helpful and gave us a lot to think about. And for those of you that joined late, or for anyone who'd like to see the slides and listen again, we'll post the webinar on our website probably early next week. And as a reminder, our third webinar in our e-learning series will be next week on Thursday, June 25th at 4 p.m. Or 27th, sorry. At 4 p.m., and it will focus on energy production and cleanup efforts in the Gulf Coast. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and Jim and Alex, and I hope everyone enjoys their weekend.